pregnant wife, was left in a snowstorm. Millionaire regretted it when she returned. They say love conquers all, yet for one woman, love itself became a betrayal so deep, it nearly cost her and her unborn child their lives. This is the story of Emily Carraway, a woman whose devotion to her wealthy husband, Christopher Harold, led her into the heart of a snowstorm, only to be abandoned when she needed him most. But destiny had different plans for Emily. Against all odds, she survived, emerging stronger than ever. And when she returned, the truth she carried would shake Christopher's world to its very foundation, leaving him to face a reckoning he never saw coming. Christopher Harold was a self-made millionaire, renowned for his sharp mind and relentless ambition. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood of Detroit, Christopher had clawed his way to the top of the real estate development world. For years, the mere mention of his name opened doors and caused seasoned investors to straighten their backs. He owned a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, spent weekends at a private club in the Hamptons, and counted among his trophies a vintage Ford Mustang, one he acquired during a charity auction at the Henry Ford Museum. He rarely let sentimentality cloud his vision, priding himself on making decisions with cold, hard logic. Emily Carraway met Christopher when she was just 22. She had taken a job as a junior paralegal at a mid-sized legal firm specializing in corporate deals and mergers. In walked Christopher, enthralling everyone around him with his commanding presence. He wasn't just handsome, he was breathtakingly confident, a man who exuded success. At the time, Emily was new to that corporate environment. She had her own dreams of eventually attending law school, but first, she needed financial stability to help her aging mother. Christopher noticed Emily's diligence, her unerring ability to spot overlooked details in contracts. Late-night phone calls turned into dinners to discuss business, and soon, business turned personal. Within a year, Christopher proposed at a ritzy restaurant in Manhattan, slipping a diamond ring onto Emily's finger in front of a standing ovation of curious onlookers. They married in an opulent ceremony that made headlines on the society pages, her modest upbringing overshadowed by his growing wealth. But beneath the surface of Christopher's charm and success lay a steel heart, one that always weighed the pros and cons of every interaction. Emily became something more akin to an accessory, a warm presence to accompany him at social events, a loyal caretaker at home, and someone he assumed would always bend to his will. She believed they were building a life together, yet behind her back, Christopher was making decisions that steadily chipped away at her sense of self. Emily didn't notice the subtle manipulations at first, the way he insisted on controlling their finances, the dismissive remarks about her law school dreams, and his casual disregard for her emotional needs. But as time wore on, the cracks in their marriage began to widen. Though Emily tried to carry on a normal life, volunteering at a local community center and occasionally assisting her mother, Christopher's growing empire demanded more and more of his time. Each business deal drew him further from home, and each new victory made him colder, more calculating. Meanwhile, Emily felt invisible, loved only when it was convenient, heard only when she offered praise. The pregnancy was unexpected, a flicker of hope in Emily's otherwise lonely life. She was overjoyed when she saw the positive test result, imagining that perhaps this baby would be the bridge that brought her and Christopher back together. She had no idea it would be the very thing that tore them further apart. Emily tried for days to find the right moment to tell Christopher about the pregnancy. On an icy winter evening, she finally gathered the courage. She prepared a quiet dinner in their luxurious condo, determined to share the news gently but joyfully. But Christopher strode in late, shrugging off his coat with a frown. Emily could see the tension in his brow as he stared at his phone, engrossed in texts from his business associates. "Christopher, can we talk for a moment?" she asked, forcing a smile even though fear curdled in her stomach. He barely looked up. "Whatever it is, can we do it later? I've got a contract negotiation with the Archer Group in the morning, and everything's going haywire. It's really important," Emily insisted, trying to steady her voice. With a sigh, Christopher placed his phone on the marble countertop. "All right, what is it?" When she told him about the pregnancy, Christopher was silent for several excruciating seconds. Emily watched as his jaw tensed. She expected him to wrap his arms around her, to share in the miracle that they were bringing a new life into the world. Instead, his eyes cooled and he slowly exhaled. "You couldn't wait?" he asked flatly. A lump formed in Emily's throat. "Wait for what?" she managed. "For a better time," Christopher snapped, turning away to retrieve his phone. "We're in the middle of the biggest property acquisition our company has ever seen. Do you realize how much pressure I'm under?" Emily blinked back tears. She wanted to retort that a pregnancy was not something she could just schedule around his business deals, but a part of her still hoped he would come around once the shock wore off. Christopher gave her a once-over, his gaze pausing briefly on her stomach. "We'll figure something out," he said at last, and then retreated into his office. That night was the first time Emily slept in the guest bedroom. She told herself it was temporary, that Christopher was just stressed, but a sinking dread told her otherwise. She could no longer deny that she'd married a man who saw everything, even their child, as negotiable if it threatened his carefully curated life. Weeks passed, each day bringing more friction between Emily and Christopher. She tried to make him understand that she needed emotional support. She had morning sickness, overwhelming fatigue, and anxiety about becoming a mother. But Christopher remained distant, scolding her for complaining too much and suggesting that she focus on staying out of his way during the busiest season of his career. One cold January evening, after an especially brutal fight, Emily packed a small duffel bag and booked a room at a modest hotel near the center of Chicago. She needed space, time to think, and some semblance of peace. Yet she found herself longing for Christopher to come after her, to call her in the middle of the night, or to realize the gravity of his actions and beg her to come home. No call ever came. Still, Emily refused to give up. She reached out to a friend who worked at a local law firm, hoping to find a part-time position that could help her earn her own money. Meanwhile, she carefully visited a prenatal clinic associated with Mount Sinai Hospital for checkups, paying out of her own savings so she wouldn't alert Christopher. Perhaps, she thought, once the child arrived, Christopher would finally understand what it meant to be a father. Then, on a mid-February day, fate took a cruel turn. Emily had returned to the condo to gather some of her belongings. Despite the tension, she still lived there intermittently. As if summoned by a cosmic force, Christopher arrived, tense from a disastrous business meeting. They argued in the hallway, voices echoing in the otherwise empty space. He blamed her for distracting him from critical decisions. He claimed the pregnancy had come at the worst possible time. "Worst possible time?" Emily repeated, feeling her stomach churn. "This is your child we're talking about." Christopher let out a mirthless laugh. "Children need stable foundations. And you've been nothing but unpredictable. You ran off to a hotel. You question my decisions. How can I trust you with the future of this family if you can't even keep it together?" Emily's fury boiled over. "I've been trying to keep it together since the day I married you," she shouted. "You manipulate. You belittle. Where's the love, Christopher?" It was a confrontation that had been building for months. Neither was willing to back down. Then, as Emily grabbed her coat to leave, something in Christopher snapped. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he roared, slamming his hand against the wall. "You want to leave? Then leave. I don't care if you're pregnant, just do it. Don't expect me to come chasing after you." Emily, tears brimming, bit her lip. She was too upset to speak, too shattered to reason with him. She pushed open the door to the raging blizzard outside, determined not to spend another minute in a home that felt suffocating. The wind whipped across her face the moment she stepped outside. Snow fell in thick sheets, rapidly covering the sidewalks. She had nowhere else to go but her battered old car in the driveway, the same one she'd used when she was a paralegal. Christopher didn't bother offering to drive her anywhere. He simply shut the door behind her, leaving her to fend for herself in a near whiteout. Emily struggled to start the car, her hands shaking more from anger than cold at first. When the engine finally sputtered to life, she realized she was in no state to make rational decisions. But stubborn pride prevailed. She refused to go back inside and beg for Christopher's help. The streets were dangerously slick. Snowdrifts rose quickly, and visibility dwindled to almost zero. Emily gripped the wheel, squinting into the blinding white. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, likely from her friend or possibly her mother. She was too rattled to answer safely, so she let it ring. Moments later, her car lurched, wheels spinning ineffectively against the slick pavement. She tried to power through it, but the vehicle skidded, slammed into a lamppost, and stalled. Emily's heart hammered. Pain shot through her abdomen as the seatbelt dug into her pregnant belly. She breathed heavily, panic surging. She forced herself to unlock the seatbelt, wincing at the strain. She tried to restart the car. Nothing happened. The engine was dead, and the blizzard was intensifying. Her phone battery blinked ominously at 10%. The screen cracked slightly from jostling in her bag. She dialed 911, praying for a quick response, but the call dropped almost immediately due to poor reception. Again and again she tried, but the wind rattled the car, and every attempt ended in a silent line. Trapped by the mounting snow, Emily felt her temperature dropping. She rummaged for any extra clothing and found only a thin scarf. Every breath started to feel like ice shards stabbing her lungs. In desperation, she got out of the car, stepping onto the slippery ground. The cold was brutal, her gloved hands quickly numbing as she attempted to make her way back towards the condo or to some visible landmark. She trudged a few steps, only to sink into a deep drift. She tried to stand, but the wind knocked her off balance. The stark reality hit her. She was pregnant, in a blizzard, and alone. Numbness spread through her limbs, and dizziness overtook her. Before she could think of a better plan, a wave of darkness overcame her, and she collapsed face first into the snow. Emily lost track of time, drifting in and out of consciousness. At one point, she felt strong arms lifting her. A voice, weathered by age, whispered reassuring words. Next, she smelled wood smoke, felt a rush of warmth, and heard the crackle of a fire. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself wrapped in thick blankets near a fireplace in a small cabin. An older woman with silver-streaked hair, wearing a faded sweater and rugged boots, knelt beside her. She introduced herself as Doris Llewellyn, a retired nurse who had taken up residence in this remote area for solitude and to escape her painful memories of losing her own daughter. Doris spoke with a gentle authority, instructing Emily to remain still while she checked for hypothermia or frostbite. Emily's lips trembled, and tears of relief blurred her vision as she realized she was safe for now. The baby, Doris assured her, seemed fine according to her rudimentary checks, but she needed a hospital for a thorough examination. Outside, the storm raged for 2 days, cutting off the cabin's electricity and phone lines. Doris used a backup generator sparingly and rationed her limited provisions. The woman's kindness was the only balm Emily had in the darkest hours of her life. She told Doris the truth, that her husband had left her in anger, that she had nowhere to go. Doris listened, occasionally nodding or uttering empathetic murmurs. By the time the skies cleared enough for Doris to drive her battered pickup truck to the nearest town, Emily had confided more of her life story than she ever had to anyone else. Something about the older woman's calm presence encouraged complete honesty, as if unburdening her soul in that isolated cabin might lead to healing. When they finally reached the town, Emily's phone sprang to life with a flood of messages and missed calls from her mother, from her friend, from an unknown number. But there was nothing from Christopher. She felt a hollow ache in her chest. Her mother's frantic voice message begged her to call back, worried sick when the news reported a massive pileup on the very road. Emily might have been traveling. After ensuring Emily was checked out at the local clinic, Doris quietly paid the bill when she noticed Emily fumbling for her wallet. Emily protested, promising to repay her. Doris simply placed a gentle hand on Emily's arm. "I've lost enough in my life," she said, voice trembling slightly. "You and that baby have a future. Let's make sure you keep it." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. For the first time in months, she felt a genuine connection, a reminder that compassion still existed in the world. News of Emily's near-fatal ordeal eventually reached Christopher through an employee who had heard rumors, not because he bothered to look for her. At first, he scoffed at the idea that she had nearly died, insisting it was a drama she staged to gain his sympathy. But when no sign of Emily returned home for weeks, a prickling of guilt invaded his conscience. He tried calling her phone a few times, each attempt answered by an automated message that the number was out of service. Unknown to him, Emily had switched numbers, desperate to avoid his reach. She had found temporary lodging in Doris's home until she could get back on her feet. The older woman lived a simple life, but she had enough room to accommodate Emily for as long as necessary. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's heart softened a bit with every small gesture of kindness. Doris showed her. The older woman took her to the local community center, introduced her to neighbors, and kept her busy helping in her small vegetable garden. Slowly, Emily began to heal from the emotional wounds as well as the physical ones. She wrote in a journal, chronicling her ordeal, and found therapy in the simple tasks of daily life. For the first time in a long while, she was in control of her destiny. Meanwhile, Christopher's business faced a looming crisis. The much-hyped Archer Group deal was on the brink of collapse, thanks to a scandal involving one of Christopher's senior executives. A series of poorly managed investments threatened the entire real estate empire, and Christopher was forced to allocate much of his time putting out fires and meeting with lawyers to salvage the deal. When faced with public questioning about his wife's disappearance, he brushed it off, attributing Emily's absence to family matters and never offering detail. But behind closed doors, rumors circulated that she had left him. Investors fretted an unsettled personal life, they said, indicated an unstable mind in business. Christopher was furious at the insinuation, but the murmurs refused to die down. In his quiet moments, if he ever allowed himself such vulnerability, Christopher recalled Emily's gentle smile, the promise of a child. He told himself he'd done nothing wrong, that Emily had been too fragile to handle the pressures of his world. Nonetheless, the sense of her absence grew, particularly late at night when he roamed the empty penthouse. Though he never admitted it, he missed her presence, the soft footsteps, the occasional laughter. But pride kept him from reaching out properly. If she wanted to return, she'd come crawling back on her own. That, at least, was what he told himself. Emily's belly swelled with each passing month, a tangible reminder of the life she was protecting. Thanks to Doris's connections, Emily managed to find a modest but steady job, helping a local attorney who specialized in family law. She assisted with paperwork and filings, her paralegal background finally put to use. Her new boss, Patricia Olson, was an empathetic soul who sensed Emily's caution around discussing her personal history. Patricia never pried, but offered gentle words of support. Every paycheck Emily earned, she tucked away, planning for the future. Slowly, she built a sense of independence she had never known during her marriage. Gone were the days of expensive clothes and lavish parties. In their place was a simpler life, one that brought real satisfaction. Emily found solace in the quiet moments she spent alone, hand resting on her growing stomach. She thought of baby names, read articles on prenatal care, and vowed that her child would never feel unloved or neglected. Despite the steady routine, Emily couldn't escape the lingering threads of her old life. She feared that Christopher would track her down. Their marriage was still legal, and she worried about custody battles once the baby arrived. The mere thought of Christopher's callous hands on her child made her stomach turn. One late afternoon, after finishing some errands in town, Emily returned to Doris's house to find an envelope waiting on the kitchen table. Inside was a letter from a Chicago-based private investigator who had apparently visited while she was out. The note read, "Miss S. Emily Harold, your husband has requested information regarding your whereabouts. This letter serves as official notice that an investigation has been initiated. If you wish to address this matter or make any statement, please contact our office." Emily's blood ran cold. She felt torn between her growing sense of empowerment and the terror that Christopher would swoop in to claim her, or worse, the baby. Doris, upon hearing the news, reassured her they'd fight this together. The older woman's unwavering support gave Emily the courage to formulate a plan. She would file for separation on grounds of abandonment, and if necessary, she'd fight for full custody in court. Patricia, her new boss, was willing to represent her pro bono if the case escalated. The days that followed were fraught with anxiety. Emily constantly looked over her shoulder, half expecting to see Christopher lurking. But the months continued to pass with no direct confrontation, only the occasional letter from the investigator. Emily steadfastly refused to respond. She wanted to protect herself and her unborn child, believing that Christopher was unfit to be a father. Little did she know that her absence was about to trigger a chain of events that would lead to a dramatic and unforeseen showdown. Back in Chicago, Christopher Harold fought to maintain his empire as scandal threatened to engulf him. A major investor accused Christopher's firm of concealing material information about environmental hazards on a development site. Legal battles were piling up, and Christopher's once limitless confidence took a hit. To his dismay, the media began focusing on not just his professional dealings, but also his personal life. Speculative headlines asked, "Where is the missing Miss S. Harold?" At first, Christopher tried to control the narrative by painting Emily as a troubled spouse who needed time away. But the tabloids weren't satisfied with vague statements. Rumors churned about a possible affair, about financial misdeeds, or even foul play. The more Christopher tried to hush it up, the more the story grew. Shareholders asked questions. Business partners expressed worry about his capacity to steer the ship through the crisis. Late one night, Christopher found himself alone in his penthouse office. The city lights twinkled below, mocking him. He'd always believed his success stemmed from his iron will, from never folding under pressure. But now, everything felt tenuous. A memory flashed, Emily's tear-streaked face when she told him she was pregnant, the hope she'd held that he would embrace fatherhood. A pang of regret twisted in his stomach, but he shoved it aside. Showing weakness was not an option. Still, doubt gnawed at him. Business associates started pulling out of deals, murmuring that Christopher's life was too messy. It dawned on him that reuniting with his wife, at least publicly, might quell the gossip. He reasoned that if Emily returned, or if he could stage some kind of reconciliation, the media would shift focus away from his faltering empire. That was when he hired the private investigator to track her down, but weeks passed with minimal leads. The investigator found only fleeting traces. A motel she'd once stayed at, a cancelled phone contract, sightings in small towns near the state line. Christopher's frustration mounted. How could Emily, someone who'd never lived outside his shadow so effectively evade him. Anger festered into something more toxic, and Christopher became determined to reclaim control at any cost. Months later, on a chilly early morning, Emily woke to sharp pains. Her contractions had begun. Doris rushed her to the local hospital, a small but well-equipped facility that had recently expanded thanks to charitable donations from the Mayo Clinic's philanthropic program. In the delivery room, Emily gripped Doris's hand with white-knuckled intensity, tears streaming down her face as her body convulsed in agony and anticipation. Hours later, Emily gave birth to a baby girl. The newborn's first cry sliced through Emily's exhaustion, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. Doris, her eyes brimming with tears, whispered, "She's beautiful, dear." Emily named the baby Amelia, a name that evoked both Emily's own name and a sense of courage. When the nurse brought Amelia to her, Emily gently touched the infant's tiny fingers. In that instant, she felt a wave of protective love, raw and overpowering. No matter what happened next, Emily vowed that her daughter would grow up in an environment of love and safety, far from the manipulations and coldness she had escaped. News of the birth came to Christopher through the same private investigator who had finally tracked Emily to the county records. Emily had refused to list Christopher as the father on the birth certificate, writing father unknown. She wanted no legal ties to him, no chance for Christopher to upend her child's future. When Christopher read the official notice about baby girl Caraway, he felt an unfamiliar clench in his chest. His child had been born without him even knowing, and Emily had rejected his paternity. This time, the regret gnawed deeper, joined by anger and a bruised pride. He ordered his legal team to prepare a paternity suit, intending to force recognition of his rights. It was more than just fatherhood. He saw it as a strategic move to restore his image. To everyone else, though, it looked suspiciously like a power play. Emily received a summons less than 2 weeks after she returned from the hospital. Her body still sore, her baby still learning to nurse. The summons demanded that Emily submit Amelia to a DNA test, or else risk legal consequences. Emily felt a jolt of fear, but also a surge of defiance. She'd come too far to let Christopher's arrogance destroy the fragile life she was building. With Doris's help and the support of Patricia's legal expertise, Emily resolved to fight back. The day arrived for a hearing in a small-town courthouse. Emily stood in front of the judge, feeling a surge of emotions, nervousness, indignation, a fierce protectiveness for Amelia. Christopher sat across the aisle, flanked by his team of high-powered attorneys. His cold gaze flicked toward Emily briefly before settling on the judge. Christopher's lawyers argued that he had every right to claim paternity and involvement in the child's life. They painted Emily as a runaway wife who'd refused to communicate and had unlawfully kept him in the dark about his own child. Emily's attorney, Patricia, countered with evidence of Christopher's abandonment, his refusal to even help her during the pregnancy, his neglect in the face of a life-threatening situation. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. The judge listened carefully, occasionally tapping her pen against the desk. When the time came for testimonies, Emily described in vivid detail how Christopher had pushed her away, how he'd left her to fend for herself in a raging blizzard. She recounted her fear, her desperation, and the near-fatal rescue by Doris. The older woman also testified, her voice breaking at times as she recalled finding Emily half-frozen in the snow. Christopher, for his part, gave a stiff denial, claiming he never expected the storm to be so severe. He alleged Emily had overreacted, that she chose to walk out. But his defense fell flat when cross-examination revealed his callous remarks and months-long disinterest. He visibly squirmed as Patricia read aloud text messages and emails that exposed his disregard for Emily's well-being. In the end, The judge declared that a DNA test would be conducted to establish paternity, but also admonished Christopher for his negligence. The judge made it clear that if the test confirmed he was the father, he'd be subject to whatever custody or support arrangements the court deemed fit. The custody hearing would be scheduled once the DNA results were confirmed. Emily left the courtroom, her head held high. Christopher, cornered by reporters outside, offered a forced smile, stating he was looking forward to being a responsible father. But Emily saw the rage simmering in his eyes, a promise that this battle was far from over. Back in Chicago, Christopher faced a cascade of ruin in his business. The Archer Group had finally withdrawn from their deal, causing other investors to lose confidence. Stock prices of his publicly listed ventures plummeted, and creditors started calling in loans. Rumors swirled that Christopher's real estate empire was nearing bankruptcy. He spent long hours meeting with financial advisors, trying to restructure debts and salvage what he could. Simultaneously, he had to endure the humiliation of being labeled a heartless husband and father in the media. Every step out of his penthouse was greeted by cameras flashing, journalists hurling questions about Emily and baby Amelia. Under normal circumstances, Christopher might have persevered. But this time, the personal and professional collapse converged in a perfect storm, leaving him feeling trapped and desperate. He fired several of his most trusted staff, suspecting them of disloyalty. Some of his top executives defected to rival firms. His lawyers advised him to settle the paternity case swiftly, as fighting it would only fuel negative publicity. As the walls closed in, Christopher began to reconsider the decisions that led him here. Late at night, alone in the penthouse that felt emptier than ever, he gazed out at the city lights, haunted by regrets. He recalled how Emily once looked at him with adoration, how her laughter filled the hollow spaces in his life. He remembered how she softly told him she was pregnant, eyes brimming with hope. Could there have been a moment when he could have chosen differently, when he could have shown her the love and respect she deserved? Yes, there had been many such moments. Christopher had squandered each one. Back in the small town, Emily cradled Amelia, feeling the warmth of her baby's tiny body against her chest. Nights were long, and sleep came in short bursts, but every time Amelia opened her curious eyes or smiled in her sleep, Emily felt a surge of joy. She worked part-time for Patricia, mostly from home, so she could care for Amelia. Doris remained her steadfast confidant, offering advice drawn from a well of life experience. But the summons for the final custody hearing arrived with a heavy thud. The DNA test had confirmed Christopher as Amelia's father, as expected. Now the court would determine parental rights. Emily was terrified that Christopher's wealth and power would overshadow her claim to full custody. She'd heard enough horror stories of manipulative fathers using legal systems to their advantage. Still, Emily refused to be cowed. She and Patricia gathered medical records, testimonies from counselors who spoke of Christopher's emotional neglect, and statements from neighbors who attested to Emily's capability as a nurturing mother. Each night, after putting Amelia to sleep, Emily pored over legal documents, steeling herself for the biggest battle of her life. Doris, in a moment of wisdom, gently reminded Emily to take care of her own well-being. "You're fighting not just for yourself now, but for Amelia," Doris said, pressing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "Remember, you don't have to do it alone." Those words revived Emily's determination. She was no longer the timid wife who silently endured emotional abuse. She had discovered her inner strength, a fierce love that outshone any fear. The day of the custody hearing dawned cold and grey, as if nature itself mirrored Emily's internal dread. She dressed in a modest suit, her hair neatly pulled back. Doris held Amelia in the hallway outside the courtroom, ready to take care of the baby during the proceedings. Christopher arrived in a tailored suit, looking as confident as ever, though beneath his polished exterior lay unmistakable tension. His legal team was smaller this time, presumably due to the financial strains on his empire. Emily and Christopher exchanged curt nods, an unspoken acknowledgement that their lives were about to change irreversibly. Over the course of several hours, witnesses testified. Medical professionals confirmed that Emily had nearly died in a snowstorm during her pregnancy. Doris gave a poignant account of finding Emily half frozen, emphasizing Christopher's total absence of concern. Patricia presented meticulously gathered evidence that Christopher had known about Emily's fragile condition, yet made no attempt to help or even contact her for months. Christopher's attorney tried to pivot, claiming Christopher had believed Emily had left for personal reasons and that he was heartbroken at her refusal to communicate. But under Patricia's relentless cross-examination, Christopher stumbled. He couldn't convincingly explain why he never tried to reconcile after learning of Emily's near-death experience. His arguments about wanting to be a father sounded hollow, overshadowed by the harsh facts of his neglect and the timing that aligned more with his business collapse than paternal longing. The judge listened attentively, occasionally looking at Christopher with a raised eyebrow. It was clear she found much of his testimony lacking in genuine remorse. After a final recess, the judge delivered her verdict. Emily would have sole legal custody of Amelia. Christopher could petition for supervised visitation after completing a parenting course and demonstrating consistent effort in being part of Amelia's life. Furthermore, Christopher was ordered to pay child support, the amount to be determined by a financial review, though given his business's precarious state, that figure might be negligible. In a single moment, Emily felt both an overwhelming sense of relief and a pang of sorrow. She had loved Christopher once, and it was tragic how far they had fallen, but her priority now was Amelia, and she stood tall as the judge finalized the ruling. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, hoping for a sensational quote. Emily clutched Amelia protectively, ignoring their shouts, while Patricia shielded her from the barrage of cameras. Christopher, caught in the throng, forced a tight-lipped smile for the cameras. "I love my daughter," he muttered to a microphone pushed into his face. But his eyes told a different story, one filled with bitterness, defeat, and perhaps an inkling of regret that could never be undone. As the months rolled on, Christopher's business continued to unravel. Several more lawsuits were filed against his firm by disgruntled investors, culminating in a forced sale of the company's assets. While Christopher still had some personal wealth, the days of opulent penthouse living and extravagant parties were over. His name, once synonymous with success, had become a cautionary tale in business circles. He attempted to see Amelia under the court's supervised visitation order. The sessions took place at a local center equipped for monitored visits, with social workers present. Emily, through her attorney, had arranged for limited contact. The first time Christopher held Amelia, he felt a flicker of something real in his heart. She was tiny, with Emily's eyes gazing curiously at this stranger who claimed to be her father. Christopher managed a small smile, but the child began to fuss, unfamiliar with the man who only now decided to appear in her life. The social worker noted Christopher's awkwardness, the faint tremor in his hands as he tried to calm Amelia. Perhaps he felt guilty for what he'd done, or maybe he was overwhelmed by the realization that fatherhood was far more than a public image or a legal claim. Whatever it was, Christopher left the session visibly shaken. Emily noticed. She saw the man who had once towered over her with arrogance, now reduced to a husk of uncertainty. Part of her felt vindicated. This was his karma for the cruelty he had inflicted upon her. Yet another part of her remembered the early days, when Christopher had shown glimpses of affection. She wondered if that version of him was gone for good, swallowed by greed and ambition. In the following weeks, Christopher missed 2 scheduled visits, each time offering feeble excuses, an emergency meeting, a financial crisis. The social worker warned him that continued absences would endanger his visitation rights altogether. Emily remained resolute. She did not encourage or discourage Christopher's visits. She allowed him the chance to do the right thing, but refused to bend over backwards for a man who had nearly cost her and her daughter their lives. Then, on a brisk autumn evening, Christopher turned up unexpectedly at Doris's front door, a battered suitcase in hand. Emily, startled by the sight of him in her safe haven, immediately stiffened. "How did you find this address?" she asked, voice trembling. Christopher looked like he had aged a decade. His shoulders sagged and dark circles rimmed his eyes. "The private investigator," he admitted. "I paid him one last time, told him I needed to apologize." Emily took a protective step backward, her heart hammering. Doris, sensing the tension, hovered nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. I lost nearly everything," Christopher said, voice cracking. "The business is gone. I'm losing the penthouse. I don't have anywhere else to go." Emily's anger flared. "And you think coming here is going to fix that? We're not your safety net." Christopher shook his head, tears brimming. "I know. I'm not asking for money or a place to stay. I just wanted to see Amelia and to tell you that I'm sorry." The air felt thick with unspoken memories. Emily searched his face, trying to discern if this was genuine remorse or another manipulation. Christopher's eyes welled up, and his voice quivered. "I was a fool. I let everything slip through my fingers, my family, my integrity. I can't blame you if you never forgive me, but I just needed to say it." Doris gently placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. Emily felt a swirl of emotions. Fury, sorrow, pity, and a small flicker of compassion. Slowly, she stepped aside, letting Christopher enter the foyer. "I'll give you 5 minutes," she said stiffly. "But this doesn't change anything about custody or visitation. You have to earn the right to be in Amelia's life." Christopher swallowed hard, nodding. He followed Emily to the living room, where Amelia was napping in a bassinet. Quietly, he knelt beside the baby, tears slipping down his cheeks. The sight of him so vulnerable, so genuinely broken, stirred conflicted feelings within Emily. She remembered the nights she cried alone, the day she nearly died, and the emptiness she felt in their marriage. But she also felt a tentative hope perhaps Christopher could change, even if he'd left a trail of destruction in his wake. In a shaky whisper, Christopher asked if he could hold Amelia. Emily stared at him for a long moment, then gently lifted her daughter and placed her in his arms. For a few minutes, he held the sleeping infant, tears falling silently onto her tiny blanket. Whatever happened next, Emily knew she would never allow Christopher to hurt her again. She had the power now, the power to protect her child and dictate the terms of any relationship. And as she watched him cradle Amelia, she understood that Christopher was paying the price for his cruelty and neglect. He had lost almost everything, and the last thread of redemption hung on his ability to become a better man. Over the following months, Christopher made efforts to attend his supervised visitations consistently. Under the watchful eyes of social workers, he learned basic childcare skills, how to change diapers, how to feed Amelia, how to soothe her crying. He stumbled often, and Amelia remained wary of him, but each small victory, like getting her to giggle, once seemed to fill him with quiet amazement. Emily continued to live in Doris's home, saving enough money to eventually rent her own apartment. She thrived in her job, receiving praise and even a small promotion for her diligent work. Patricia commended Emily on her resilience, hinting that she might someday become a full-fledged paralegal again, or even pursue her dream of law school. Life was far from perfect, but it was stable. And that was more than Emily had ever hoped for in those harrowing days when she was left to freeze in the snow. She found fulfillment in motherhood, forging a bond with Amelia that no storm or man could break. Christopher, in the meantime, took on a modest job consulting for a smaller firm, gone were the designer suits and private jets, replaced by public transportation and an economy apartment. His fall from grace was widely discussed in the media, but eventually the gossip moved on to newer scandals. Through therapy sessions, mandated by the court and his own introspection, Christopher began to see the man he had become and the boy inside him who once yearned for success to prove his worth. He told his therapist he regretted not cherishing Emily when they were together, acknowledging that money and ambition had blinded him to the blessings he already had. One frigid December evening, nearly a year after Amelia's birth, Emily was tidying up the kitchen while Amelia slept in the nursery. Doris had gone to visit relatives. A knock at the door startled Emily. She opened it to find Christopher standing on the stoop, snow clinging to his coat. Concern flashed across her face, given the lateness of the hour. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice low to avoid waking the baby. Christopher averted his eyes. He seemed nervous. I wanted to give you something. A letter." She crossed her arms, recalling the many letters she'd received from him, some filled with legal demands, others with hollow apologies. "Another letter?" He nodded, passing her a plain, white envelope. She hesitated before opening it, scanning the handwritten lines. The letter was an admission of guilt, a heartfelt apology detailing every regret he carried, from dismissing her pregnancy to abandoning her in the storm. It was a promise that he would respect her decisions and do whatever it took to support Amelia's future, whether that meant stepping aside or being involved only under her terms. He wrote that he understood he might never be forgiven, but he hoped to someday be someone Amelia could be proud to call her father. Emily's throat tightened. She had dreamed of hearing these words when she was pregnant, desperate for a sliver of his compassion. The letter ended with a simple statement: "I know that my karma has come full circle. I have lost what matters most, and I can't blame anyone but myself." She folded the letter, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. Christopher exhaled a breath he'd been holding. He looked like a man ready to face the rest of his life, no matter how hard. "I'll leave you to it," he said quietly, turning to go. Impulsively, Emily reached out. "Wait, do you want to come inside for a minute?" Surprise flickered across his face. He nodded timidly, stepping over the threshold. They sat in the living room, an echo of the time he had appeared with a suitcase in hand. This time, there was no anger or desperation in the air, only a cautious acceptance that life had changed them both. Emily offered him tea, which he held but did not drink. He gazed around the cozy home, noting the small touches that made it feel welcoming, the framed pictures of Amelia, the handmade quilts Doris had sewn. His gaze lingered on Emily, who looked more at peace than he'd ever seen her. After a few moments of silence, Emily spoke. "I don't hate you. I did for a while, but hate is heavy. I have Amelia to think of now, and I refuse to poison her life with bitterness." Christopher swallowed, emotions warring on his face. "I never deserved you," he said simply. She shook her head. "It's not about deserving, it's about learning. We can't erase what happened, but maybe, for Amelia's sake, we can find a way to move forward." That night, they talked about practicalities, visitation schedules, financial responsibilities, the possibility of co-parenting classes. For the first time, Christopher listened earnestly. The conversation didn't heal every wound or eliminate every trace of resentment, but it laid a fragile foundation for a future in which Amelia's well-being took precedence. In the quiet hours before dawn, Christopher left, carefully closing the door behind him. Emily stood there for a long moment, absorbing the enormity of what had just transpired. She glanced at the letter again, reading those words of contrition. Hard karma had indeed hit Christopher, his empire in ruins, his reputation tarnished. Yet, perhaps this moment signaled that something better could emerge from the wreckage if he truly sought redemption. Outside, the snow glistened under the moonlight, a reminder of how far she had come since that storm nearly claimed her life. Emily breathed deeply, a sense of closure settling in her chest. Life would never be the same, but it was her life now, one she had fought for, survived for, and built anew with love at its center. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately, hope. Emily's story reminds us that even in the darkest hour, when all seems lost and the snow threatens to bury us, there can be a path forward built on resilience, honesty, and love. Christopher learned the painful lesson that material success cannot replace genuine compassion and responsibility. In the end, it was Emily's unwavering strength and a simple act of human kindness that illuminated a new path for them both.
He was the dashing mogul every ambitious entrepreneur wanted to emulate. She was the poised, loyal wife who had stood by him from humble beginnings. No one would have guessed that behind the gated mansion's manicured lawns, betrayal festered like poison. Until one day, in a flurry of financial sabotage, he let his mistress cut off his wife's credit cards. It was humiliating, scandalous, and only the beginning of a whirlwind that would pit powerful business alliances against each other. In a boardroom confrontation that stunned everyone, the CEO himself stepped in, but not in the way anyone expected. Buckle up. This is the story of love, greed, and revenge. Jordan Alberts was not born into luxury. He grew up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Milwaukee, where he learned to hustle by selling candy bars door to door at the age of 10. Over the years, Jordan's unwavering determination and charm propelled him into better circles. First at a local startup, then into his own tech company that caught the eye of an angel investor. By the time he was 35, Jordan was a self-made millionaire, a prominent figure on various entrepreneurial boards, and had connections with people like Mark Cuban, Bill Gates, and a few top executives at Google. His wife, Elizabeth Alberts née Wagner, had been with him through everything. They met in college at a small tech entrepreneur club meeting, both bright-eyed and dreaming of changing the world. Elizabeth came from a modest background, too. Her father was a retired auto mechanic, and her mother a homemaker. She'd studied communications with an emphasis on public relations, and it was through Elizabeth's network of contacts that Jordan first gained access to small local pitch events. While Jordan pitched his innovative software for automating small business tasks, Elizabeth made calls, arranged coffee meetups, and tried to capture the interest of potential backers. They married in a little chapel by Lake Michigan. It wasn't a lavish wedding, no star-studded guest list, no fancy reception at the Ritz. But to Jordan and Elizabeth, it felt perfect. A union built on genuine love, unwavering support, and a shared dream of building a life and a business empire together. Over the next decade, they grew from a modest condominium in Milwaukee to a stunning estate in Austin near Lake Travis, with a sweeping view of the water and rolling Texas hills. It was there at a philanthropic event organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that Jordan's name landed on the radar of top-level investors. His company's smart automation technology was recognized for its potential to transform not just small businesses, but large-scale manufacturing and logistics. Soon after, Jordan's net worth skyrocketed from a mere $5 million to well over $200 million. For a while, everything was picture perfect. The marriage was strong, their personal synergy unwavering. Elizabeth handled some philanthropic duties, organizing events, acting as a goodwill ambassador for Jordan's brand, and forging new partnerships through her PR background. Their household staff adored them, describing Elizabeth as kind, gracious, and always mindful of the people around her. But money can be a seductive force, and success can open doors to darker temptations. Jordan began attending more exclusive networking events in Beverly Hills, New York, and beyond. Elizabeth was often at his side, but there were times she couldn't attend. Perhaps she was busy finalizing the details for a charity gala, or maybe she was simply burnt out from the unrelenting schedule. It was during these times, rare at first, then increasingly common, that Jordan got close to someone else. Her name was Ava Monroe. She was a rising star in the world of technology law, representing high-profile clients like Tesla, Amazon, and a few top-tier cryptocurrency exchanges. She had a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations, seductive in social gatherings, and unbelievably charming behind closed doors. The rumor mill started buzzing the moment Ava was seen at Jordan's table during a private dinner after a tech summit in Las Vegas. Elizabeth wasn't there. She had chosen to stay in Austin, meeting with a team of female entrepreneurs Jordan was mentoring. A few people whispered about Jordan's visible fascination with Ava, the way he leaned in whenever she spoke, how they clinked champagne flutes with an intimacy that suggested more than just business talk. No one knew for certain how fast or how deep it went, but soon the signs became undeniable. Lavish gifts appeared on Ava's social media, including a diamond bracelet, suspiciously similar to the ones Jordan's company had once gifted important clients. Photos emerged of Jordan and Ava at high-end restaurants in Manhattan, always carefully angled to obscure Jordan's face, though keen observers could still identify him by the sliver of a recognizable watch or the faint reflection in a mirrored wall. By the time the rumors reached Elizabeth, they were no longer rumors, but near-confirmed facts. She felt her chest tighten, her world spinning out of control. This couldn't be real. Jordan had always been a loyal partner. But the evidence was too compelling to deny. She confronted him in the privacy of their Lakeview mansion. At first, Jordan denied everything. Yet denial quickly turned into a half-hearted admission once Elizabeth presented him with photographic evidence. Like a skilled negotiator used to controlling deals, Jordan tried to manipulate the situation, insisting that Ava was just a business associate, someone he occasionally had dinner with. But Elizabeth saw right through it. She had always been adept at reading him. A chill settled over their once loving home. Elizabeth, determined to preserve her dignity, demanded they enter marriage counseling, or at the very least step away from high-profile events until they resolved their issues in private. Jordan nodded, providing non-committal answers. He had never liked therapy, never seen the point in discussing feelings with a stranger. He agreed to her wishes on the surface, yet beneath the facade, he continued his involvement with Ava, allowing the illicit relationship to take root. This was the calm before the storm. For soon Elizabeth's sense of betrayal would pale in comparison to the massive financial and emotional blow about to come her way. Weeks passed. Elizabeth tried to focus on her philanthropic work and personal projects, attempting to distract herself from the growing chasm between her and Jordan. When a local charity she sponsored invited her to discuss future donations, Elizabeth discovered something shocking. Her personal credit card was declined. Embarrassment washed over her in front of the unsuspecting staff. She tried another card. Sure, it must have been a glitch, but that too was declined. The staff politely suggested she call her bank, and Elizabeth excused herself with a polite smile, her hands trembling as she left the office. Elizabeth called the bank, suspecting fraud or an administrative error. But the bank's representative informed her that both cards had been cancelled the previous week. Under their joint account, they were tied to Jordan's finances, and evidently Jordan had authorized the cancellation. It felt like a punch to the gut. Why on earth would Jordan cancel her cards without her knowledge or consent? They had never had major financial disputes. Elizabeth always had access to family funds, albeit responsibly. She dialed Jordan, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent him several frantic texts. No response. Later that evening, Jordan came home exuding an air of tired disinterest. Elizabeth confronted him the moment he walked through the door. Under the chandelier's glow, which reflected in her tear-filled eyes, Jordan brushed aside her questions with a dismissive wave. "I needed to consolidate our finances," he said, removing his blazer. "You can use the joint checking account for a while." "No big deal, no big deal." Elizabeth's frustration swelled. "You cancelled my credit cards without even telling me what's going on. Are you punishing me for something?" Jordan's eyes flicked away nervously, and that was when Elizabeth realized he was lying again. The next words that came from his mouth were not only shocking, but also laced with a cruelty she never imagined he was capable of. "Ava suggested we revisit some of my expenses. She found that you were spending frivolously. It made sense to limit credit usage." Elizabeth's heart dropped to her stomach. Ava. That woman was now meddling in their finances. As if the affair wasn't enough, Jordan had allowed this mistress to encroach into an arena that Elizabeth believed was sacred, her own household stability. "What is Ava doing reviewing my spending? Since when does your fling get to decide what is or isn't frivolous?" Elizabeth spat tears, threatening to spill. Jordan made an attempt at a calming gesture, but his words only fanned the flames. "She's helping me restructure. Her firm has great insights into corporate finances. This is about the business, Elizabeth. It's not personal." Not personal. Elizabeth recalled how intimately personal their marriage had always been. They built every aspect of their lives together, from small decisions about wallpaper colors to big entrepreneurial leaps that demanded everything from both of them. Now Jordan was shutting her out, consulting Ava instead. In a quavering voice, Elizabeth demanded, "Reinstate my cards. I am your wife. I have a right to our finances, and you know I've never been irresponsible with money." Jordan's face hardened with a new arrogance. "Not until we finalize our restructure," he said, referring to some nebulous plan Elizabeth knew little about. "I'll handle everything in the meantime." That moment, that cold exchange, was a harbinger of the bigger heartbreak to come. If Jordan was letting Ava control such details, what other aspects of their marriage was he willing to let her sabotage? As the days turned into weeks, Elizabeth discovered one more blow after another. The monthly allowance she used to cover household expenses had been slashed without explanation. The staff, including her personal assistant, was laid off. Bills began piling up, addressed to her name, but with no means to pay them aside from groveling at Jordan's feet. Friends and family started to notice. Elizabeth tried to hide her shame. She confided in her sister Caroline, who was enraged at Jordan. "This is financial abuse," Caroline insisted. "You should speak to a lawyer." Elizabeth shuddered at the thought. She still believed they could salvage their relationship, that Jordan would snap out of whatever daze Ava had put him in. Yet a small part of her whispered that maybe Caroline was right. Then came a fateful meeting at a hotel conference suite in Los Angeles, one that Jordan had insisted Elizabeth attend. It was a gathering of major tech moguls, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who were rumored to be there to discuss new tech innovations in global logistics. When Elizabeth arrived, she quickly realized something was off. She saw Jordan in the lounge area, standing far too close to Ava, exchanging hushed conversations. Seeing Elizabeth from a distance, Jordan slipped away discreetly, leaving Ava behind. Elizabeth approached her husband with a forced smile. "I'm here," she said, desperate to maintain composure. "What's the plan?" Jordan gave a curt nod. "There's a closed-door session for the key players only. You'll have to wait outside." In the past, Elizabeth had always been included in these key player sessions as Jordan's partner and PR advisor. The subtle exclusion burned her pride. She swallowed her anger. "Sure, I can wait." After hours of waiting, she found Jordan and Ava laughing together near the bar. As she approached, Jordan's phone buzzed, and he stepped away. That was when Ava turned a chilling smirk on her face. "You know Jordan's a visionary," Ava said, swirling the wine in her glass. "He needs someone who can keep up with him on all levels: business, ambition, excitement." Elizabeth felt her face flush with anger. "I've been by his side for years. We built this together." Ava gave a theatrical shrug. "Maybe in the past. But times change. People evolve. I guess you were too comfortable." Elizabeth clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She was determined not to make a scene in front of such influential people. But oh, how she wanted to lash out to expose Ava for the home-wrecker she was. Ava flicked her hair behind her shoulder, noticing Elizabeth's agitation. "Things will be better if you accept it," she cooed, as if offering advice to a friend. Jordan's moved on in more ways than one. The finances are just the beginning. Elizabeth's body went cold. She realized in that moment how truly precarious her situation was. Ava was not simply a fling. She was positioning herself as a partner in Jordan's professional and personal life. The credit cards were just one step in what looked like a systematic campaign to push Elizabeth out of everything she and Jordan had built. Still, Elizabeth refused to crumble. She left the event quietly, but her mind churned with rage and heartbreak. It was time for her to take action. She needed to protect herself, her assets, and her dignity. Little did she know that as she plotted her next move, Jordan and Ava were preparing a financial ambush that would push her to the brink. Only fate and an unexpected intervention by a certain CEO would alter the course of their twisted game. In the days after the Los Angeles conference, Elizabeth attempted to consult with attorneys. She picked up a referral from a friend who once worked with a high-profile divorce lawyer in New York. The initial phone calls were sobering, with Jordan's empire being primarily under his name and her credit cards cancelled. She had limited liquidity to hire top-tier representation. Even so, Elizabeth pressed forward. She managed to scrape together some funds from a personal savings account. Jordan had no access to money she had set aside from her early PR consulting days. It wasn't a large sum, but enough to secure a preliminary consultation. During that consultation, her lawyer, Michelle Liu, a bright and empathetic but hard-hitting attorney based in Houston, laid out the hard truth. Financial abuse and infidelity are serious grounds for divorce, Michelle said, scanning through Elizabeth's financial statements. But if Jordan's funneling money and assets into new accounts under his own name, or shifting resources to places you can't see, we need proof, and we need it fast. Elizabeth swallowed. She recounted Ava's involvement, how she was effectively orchestrating the restructuring. Michelle's pen scribbled quickly over a notepad. "You have a right to half of the marital assets, Elizabeth, but it looks like your husband is 2 steps ahead. We must move quickly." The plan was to gather evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing and file a court order to freeze marital assets, ensuring Elizabeth had a fair shot. But as they began drafting documents and rummaging through what records Elizabeth had, an avalanche of shocking details surfaced. Jordan wasn't merely cancelling credit cards. He was transferring stocks from their joint portfolio into an account under his newly formed trust. He had changed the authorized signatory details for a few of their properties, effectively locking Elizabeth out. He was also taking out lines of credit against certain properties, presumably to fund new ventures that, as Elizabeth suspected, involved Ava. The emotional strain weighed heavily on Elizabeth. She couldn't sleep, her appetite waned. Each day felt like standing at the center of a storm. Yet if she thought this was the worst of it, she was mistaken. One evening, after finalizing some documents with Michelle, Elizabeth returned to her mansion to find her keycard didn't work on the electronic locks. Pounding on the door, she shouted for the live-in staff if any were left. Seconds later, the door opened slightly, revealing Ava's face. "Jordan's not here," Ava said icily. "You should call next time." Elizabeth's heart hammered. "This is my home. Get out of my way," she demanded, trying to push past. But Ava slid in front of her, refusing to budge. "He told me you're not welcome here anymore until the legal mess is settled," Ava sneered. "I have every right to ask you to leave." Elizabeth was trembling with fury. "You have no rights here. You're the mistress, not the wife." With a cold laugh, Ava stepped aside and pointed at Elizabeth's luggage haphazardly placed in the foyer. "Jordan left these for you," she said. "He said to pack whatever else you need and let security escort you out if you refuse to leave." Elizabeth blinked away tears, her throat raw with outrage. She was being thrown out of her own home by the woman who had intruded into her marriage. That moment was a cruel epiphany. Jordan had not only cut off her finances, but now he was physically pushing her out of the place she had shared with him for years. Yet in all that darkness, a sliver of light emerged the next morning. Elizabeth received a phone call from a close mutual friend, Marcus O'Donnell, who worked with Jordan at a large tech conglomerate in Dallas. Marcus was someone Elizabeth trusted, an executive who had known Jordan since the early days. He had seen them build the company from the ground up. Elizabeth Marcus said, his tone urgent. "I don't know everything that's going on, but I heard from your staff that you've been locked out. There's a board meeting next week. Jordan wants to finalize some big decisions. If you can get to that meeting and talk to the chairman, maybe you can find some leverage." Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. The chairman of this particular conglomerate was none other than famed CEO David Hartridge, known not just for his visionary leadership, but also for a strict code of ethics. Over the years, Hartridge had invested heavily in Jordan's business. He was the reason Jordan sat on that board. "He's not the type to meddle in personal affairs," Marcus warned. "But if Jordan's pulling stunts that compromise your share in the company, Hartridge might step in. He's big on fairness and hates scandal." It was the glimmer of hope Elizabeth needed. She thanked Marcus profusely. The plan was simple: attend the board meeting, confront Jordan in front of Hartridge, and present enough evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing to ensure the board and possibly the entire conglomerate would not stand for it. She spent the week gathering documents, bank statements, and text message screenshots that implicated Jordan in unscrupulous financial moves. Michelle Liu helped compile everything into a neat folder. "You need to be prepared for Jordan to lash out," Michelle warned. "He'll try to discredit you in front of the board." Elizabeth nodded her determination, overshadowing her fear. She practiced her speech, reciting it in the mirror of her modest hotel room, where she had temporarily moved. Heart pounding, she told herself that if there was ever a time to fight, it was now. Finally, The day of the board meeting arrived. Elizabeth dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that radiated confidence. She walked into the corporate skyscraper in downtown Dallas, her chin held high despite the knot in her stomach. She spotted Jordan in the corridor, flanked by Ava and a couple of the board members. As soon as he saw Elizabeth, his expression darkened. "You're not supposed to be here," Jordan said, trying to keep his voice low. Elizabeth raised her chin. "I'm still an investor in your company. I hold shares. So yes, I'm attending the board meeting." Ava stepped in with a condescending smile. "Don't make a scene, Elizabeth. This meeting is for serious stakeholders." "I am a serious stakeholder," Elizabeth retorted, voice steady. "I'm your wife, still legally, and I'm half of this empire's foundation." Behind them, a tall figure approached CEO David Hartridge himself, a man in his 50s with graying temples and a firm handshake. He regarded Elizabeth with polite curiosity. "Ms. Alberts, I presume?" Elizabeth nodded, handing over her invitation papers and a letter from her attorney, which stated that she possessed partial shares. Hartridge studied the documents, then gave a curt nod indicating she was allowed to attend. Jordan shot Elizabeth a glare that spoke volumes. "You have no idea what you're getting into." But Elizabeth did. She was here to preserve her dignity, her livelihood, and the legacy she had helped build. The meeting commenced in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. The board members sat around a large mahogany table, exchanging pleasantries about the upcoming quarter's projections. Jordan made a short presentation on a new partnership with a logistics firm, highlighting expansions and new contracts. A few board members clapped. Then came time for open discussion. Elizabeth raised her hand, clearing her throat. "I'd like to address some concerns about the financial structuring Jordan is proposing." She began, her voice reverberating across the silent room. Jordan's face reddened. Ava, seated beside him, tried to intervene. "We should keep personal matters out of board discussions," she said. But Elizabeth pressed on, raising the folder of evidence. "These changes aren't just personal," Elizabeth said. "They could affect company stability. Jordan is funneling resources into a new trust, making questionable decisions without transparency. I have documents signed by him with references to Ms. Ava Monroe, demonstrating a conflict of interest that could potentially compromise investor trust." A hush fell over the room. Hartridge's brow creased. "Jordan, is this true?" Jordan stood, scrambling for composure. "This is a personal matter. Elizabeth is overstepping her bounds." "She's not," Hartridge replied, his voice sharp. "If there's a conflict of interest that threatens the stability of our partnership, it's very much a board matter." Jordan's eyes darted between Hartridge and Elizabeth. For the first time, he seemed cornered, uncertain how to proceed. Ava shot Elizabeth a lethal glare, realizing that Elizabeth's boldness had forced the topic into official territory. The tension was palpable. Elizabeth's heart thumped so loudly, she was certain everyone could hear it. But she stood her ground. Continuing. "I also discovered lines of credit being taken against marital properties to fund expansions. These expansions could be legitimate, but the details are obscured. I have reason to believe Ms. Monroe is manipulating these finances for her personal gain." Murmurs rippled through the board. A couple members exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who might have sided with Jordan seemed rattled by the magnitude of Elizabeth's accusations. Hartridge steepled his fingers, evaluating the situation. "I propose we recess for 15 minutes. Jordan, Elizabeth, Ms. Monroe, please step into my office." Jordan inhaled frustration etched across his features, But he couldn't refuse the CEO's request, not without causing a catastrophic scene. The three followed Hartridge into a glass-walled corner office, shutting the door behind them. In that tense, enclosed space, the real battle began. Elizabeth laid out her evidence on the polished table before Hartridge. Jordan tried to dismiss it all as a personal dispute, but Hartridge was no fool. He could see the potential for scandal, especially if a partner was using company infrastructure for personal vendettas. Throughout this heated exchange, Ava attempted to deflect blame. She portrayed herself as a legal advisor, merely suggesting financial moves, disclaiming any wrongdoing. But Elizabeth's carefully compiled documents suggested otherwise. Emails, text messages, and proposed legal documents bore Ava's digital fingerprints. Hartridge's expression darkened. "Jordan, this is unacceptable. If these documents are authentic, you've put your personal entanglements ahead of corporate responsibility. I won't allow it under my leadership." Jordan's face went pale. He tried to protest, to label Elizabeth's claims as overblown, but Hartridge had already made up his mind. "Until this is sorted out, Jordan, I'm placing your proposals on hold. We can't move forward with any major financial changes if they're under this sort of ethical cloud." Elizabeth felt a surge of relief, a faint vindication. While she hadn't resolved the core issue of Jordan's betrayal, at least the board wasn't letting him run roughshod over her financial future. But Jordan, cornered and embarrassed, lashed out in desperation. "You can't shut me down like this," he snapped at Hartridge, voice tight with anger. "I'm the one who made that original deal with your conglomerate. You need my innovation." Hartridge stood up, bristling at Jordan's tone. "I'm the CEO, and you've just made me question your reliability and integrity. Watch yourself, Jordan." Ava stepped closer to Jordan, placing a hand on his arm to calm him, but he shrugged her off. "You'll regret this," he warned Hartridge. Then turned to Elizabeth. "And you made a fool of me in front of everyone." Elizabeth clenched her fists, refusing to cower. "You did that to yourself," she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Jordan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ava followed quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Hartridge sighed, looking at Elizabeth, who was holding back tears. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Hartridge said. "I'm sorry about your personal struggles, but I have to protect the board's interests. If you need anything, contact my office. I'm not a family court judge, but I won't let Jordan drag the company down." With that, Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. She had achieved a small but crucial victory, yet she couldn't shake the nagging sense that Jordan, humiliated and cornered, was far from finished. She left the skyscraper, stepping out into the bright Dallas sun, uncertain, but determined. Little did she know this chapter was only the start of a far more explosive confrontation, one that would involve security teams, sudden betrayals, and a twist that would bring Jordan himself to his knees. Life outside the mansion was lonely, but Elizabeth was thankful for the reprieve from Ava's manipulations. She rented a small apartment near downtown Austin and used what funds she had left to secure her basic needs, while Michelle continued to press for a financial freeze on Jordan's assets. In the weeks following the tense board meeting, Jordan went surprisingly quiet. No more legal letters arrived. No more credit lines were sabotaged. He didn't attempt to contact Elizabeth, nor did Ava. Instead, it seemed as though they had retreated into some silent fortress, likely strategizing their next move. Elizabeth took advantage of the lull. She reconnected with old friends and mentors, explaining partially at least what she was going through. While many were shocked, They offered support in the form of references, moral encouragement, and occasional leads for a stable job or a business partnership. Despite the heartbreak, Elizabeth discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a passive bystander in Jordan's world. She had her own capabilities, her own strengths. Slowly, she started consulting for small tech firms, using her communications and PR background to help them craft compelling pitches. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest work that reminded her she could stand on her own 2 feet. Then one evening, she received a phone call from an unknown number. A crisp, professional voice greeted her. "Hello, Elizabeth. This is Patricia Carlson. I'm an executive assistant at Tesla, working under Elon Musk's leadership team." Elizabeth's heart thudded. She had met Patricia briefly at a tech conference in Berlin 2 years ago, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "How can I help you?" Elizabeth asked, mind racing. Patricia hesitated. "I might have information relevant to your predicament with Jordan. Let's just say some of our legal divisions have been observing Ava Monroe for a while, and some red flags have come up." Red flags. Elizabeth's curiosity flared. "You're investigating her?" A slow exhale from the other end. "Our major concern is that she's potentially engaged in insider trading, or at least something that veers close to it. She's been known to manipulate powerful men to gain inside info on deals, especially around new technologies. We don't have direct evidence, but we do know that she's heavily involved in your husband's finances. We suspect she might be siphoning resources for her own agendas." Elizabeth's mind reeled. This was bigger than a domestic spat. Ava might be leveraging Jordan's resources and connections to stake her own claims in the tech world. That explained the sudden shifts in finances, the new trust accounts, and the lines of credit. Patricia continued. "We want to bring her down, but we need more information. You, Elizabeth, might be in a unique position to gather that." Elizabeth tapped her fingers on the kitchen counter. "Isn't that something your legal team handles?" A rueful laugh. "Yes, but we need Jordan's direct involvement. We suspect he's unwittingly giving her access to confidential materials through corporate crossovers or joint ventures. If you can help us prove it, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, protect Tesla's proprietary data, and help you gain leverage in your divorce." Elizabeth considered the offer. It was risky. If Ava was truly up to something illegal, Elizabeth could expose herself to potential backlash, but the lure of finally getting the upper hand was strong. "I'll do what I can," Elizabeth replied cautiously. "But how do I communicate with you about this?" Patricia gave her a secure email address and instructions on how to encrypt files. "And one more thing," Elizabeth Patricia said, before hanging up. "People like Ava are cunning. She'll anticipate your every move. Don't trust phone lines or any device that Jordan has access to. Be careful." Elizabeth thanked her and ended the call. Adrenaline coursing through her. For the next few days, she scoured her digital archives for anything that might hint at insider information. Jordan's old emails messages about collaborations with major tech companies like Tesla or Amazon, documents that Ava might have manipulated anything that showed a trail of questionable activity. She found a few suspicious threads, forwarded emails from Jordan's corporate account that were CC'd to Ava's personal address. Attachments relating to Tesla's Project Next Gen battery were among them, though none of this was strictly proof of wrongdoing yet. Elizabeth compiled what she could and sent them to the secure email Patricia provided. In response, Patricia confirmed that these were valuable leads, but incomplete. "Keep digging," she urged, "and let me know if you get direct evidence of deals or monetary gains tied to these inside details. Meanwhile, Michelle Elizabeth's lawyer was preparing for a preliminary hearing to freeze some of Jordan's assets. She insisted Elizabeth come to court to testify about the financial abuse and the suspicious activities they had uncovered. But Jordan's side surprised them by agreeing to a partial freeze without argument. "That's strange," Michelle said, tapping a pen against the conference table. "Why would he agree so easily?" Elizabeth shrugged, perplexed. "Maybe he realizes fighting me will look bad in front of the board." But Michelle wasn't convinced. "I suspect he's preparing a bigger move. Be vigilant. He may have more leverage than we know." The next morning, Elizabeth received an unsolicited text from Jordan. "We need to talk, face to face." She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: anger, sorrow, curiosity. But she knew she had to tread carefully. She agreed to meet him in a public place, a cafe near the courthouse, where she could keep the upper hand. When Jordan arrived, he looked tired, as though the weight of his troubles had worn him down. He offered a half-smile, which Elizabeth did not return. "Liz," he began using the old nickname he once uttered, with affection. Things got out of hand. She crossed her arms. "You think—" He sighed, scanning her face for warmth that was no longer there. "I want to settle this amicably. We can discuss spousal support, property divisions, everything. No need for a long, nasty court battle." Elizabeth let the silence hover. She wasn't naive enough to believe him at face value. "Amicably? Are you telling me Ava is out of the picture?" Jordan's shoulders tensed. "This is about you and me, not her. Look, maybe I got carried away with Ava's advice. She's a brilliant attorney." "She's manipulative," Elizabeth cut in sharply. He brushed the point aside. "Regardless, I'm willing to compromise, but I need you to lay off this insider trading nonsense. It's reckless. You're endangering my reputation." Elizabeth realized then that Jordan knew she'd been snooping into his communications. Perhaps Tesla's legal inquiries had begun reverberating in his circle. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was worried, if not about losing her, then about losing his empire. "You made me the enemy," Elizabeth replied, in a hushed, trembling tone. "When you let your mistress cut off my cards and throw me out of my home." Jordan looked away, shame flickering on his face. "I didn't handle that well. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under with these deals." She waited, letting him squirm. Then he continued. "You'll get a fair share. I promise. I just need you to stop meddling in my professional affairs, especially with Tesla or any other major collaborators. You'll ruin me if you do." A bitter laugh escaped Elizabeth. She thought of all the times she had stood beside him, protecting him, representing him before powerful players, forging alliances that were crucial to his success. Now he was pleading for her, not to ruin him. The irony nearly choked her. Before she could respond, Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and muttered a soft curse. "I have to go," he said, throwing some cash on the table for their untouched coffees. Elizabeth watched him leave a mixture of pity and disdain swirling in her stomach. It was obvious he was desperate, but was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a ploy to keep her from uncovering more incriminating information about Ava? That question lingered as she returned to her apartment, drained. However, a new email from Patricia waited in her inbox. It contained an attachment, a partial timeline of suspicious trades linked to accounts rumored to be controlled by Ava Monroe. There were large bets placed on Tesla's stock ahead of public announcements. Gains in the tens of millions. This is huge, Elizabeth thought. If she connected these trades to emails or calls between Jordan and Ava, it could be the smoking gun. And while Elizabeth had no intention of going to the feds on her own, Tesla's legal team could bury Ava, and by extension, Jordan's complicity, if he was involved. Elizabeth clutched her phone, anxiety coursing through her. She was walking a razor's edge. One false step, and Jordan might retaliate more fiercely, or Ava might strike. But a successful strike against Ava could free Elizabeth from this entire ordeal, giving her the leverage to secure a fair divorce settlement, or even land Jordan in deeper trouble, depending on his role. She reached for her phone to text Patricia when it buzzed in her hand. A call from an unknown number again. Tentatively, Elizabeth answered. A man's voice greeted her calm and steady. "Hello, Ms. Alberts. My name is Gregory Shaw. I'm part of CEO David Hartridge's legal counsel. He asked me to follow up regarding the situation with your husband." Elizabeth's heart skipped. Hartridge's legal counsel. "We understand from Mr. Hartridge's conversation with you that there might be unethical or even illegal behavior in play," Gregory continued. "The board is concerned about potential liability if Jordan's personal dealings spill into our corporate structure. We can't risk another scandal. Mr. Hartridge would like to assist you discreetly." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She was on the cusp of powerful alliances forming against Jordan and Ava, but the more people got involved, the more dangerous it felt. Gregory concluded, "We'll be in touch with your lawyer. If you have any crucial evidence, Mr. Hartridge suggests you keep it secure. He wants to avoid a public meltdown, but he's prepared to do what's necessary to protect the company's interests, and that includes supporting you in your legal disputes, if it comes to that." Hanging up. Elizabeth felt a measure of validation. The cracks in Jordan's seemingly untouchable world were growing. Perhaps justice would prevail. Yet as she prepared to finalize the next round of documents for Michelle, a gnawing worry kept her awake at night. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Jordan, though once gentle and loving, had shown he could be ruthless when threatened. She braced herself for the storm that was surely coming. The next time Elizabeth saw Jordan in person, it wasn't by chance or a carefully arranged meeting. It was at the headquarters of Hartridge's conglomerate in Dallas. A sudden emergency board session had been called to address urgent corporate matters, and Elizabeth, having been notified by Gregory Shaw, arrived prepared. She walked into the reception area, her heart pounding with anticipation. Michelle Liu had insisted on accompanying her, but at the last minute she was called to handle a crucial filing. Elizabeth went alone, relying on the moral support from Gregory and the knowledge that Hartridge wanted the truth on record. Jordan was already inside the boardroom with Ava, who paced like a clad tiger. When Elizabeth entered, they both snapped their heads in her direction. Ava's glare could have sliced glass. Jordan's face was inscrutable, tense, angry, but also tinged with fear. Hartridge arrived moments later, trailed by a few board members and legal advisors. He wasted no time in stating the purpose of the meeting. "Allegations have come to my attention that Ms. Monroe has been engaging in stock trades leveraging proprietary information from Jordan's company and potentially from our own collaborations. We need to clarify the truth. Now." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Ava's jaw clenched. "This is preposterous," she began. "We demand to see your proof." Hartridge nodded to one of his advisors, who distributed printed documents, timelines of suspicious trades, tied to accounts flagged by Tesla's legal team, along with correspondences that Elizabeth and Patricia had pieced together. Jordan snatched a packet from the advisor. His eyes swept over the page's color, draining from his face. Ava's lips thinned, and for a moment Elizabeth could see the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes. Hartridge pinned them with a stern gaze. "Jordan, you've been a valuable partner. I don't want to see your personal life derail your professional standing, but this is bigger than your marriage. Insider trading is a federal crime, and if Ms. Monroe is using your business resources to pull this off, you're implicated." Ava recovered quickly. She placed a hand on Jordan's arm, her voice smooth. "This is a misunderstanding, David. Anyone can align stock trades with corporate announcements. It's called speculation." Elizabeth decided enough was enough. She stood. "Speculation is one thing, but forwarding private emails, entire business proposals, and preliminary press releases is not speculation. I've seen the messages. You're literally discussing the best times to execute trades based on announcements that hadn't been made public yet." Ava whirled on Elizabeth. "You have no legal standing to claim that. You're just a scorned wife trying to sabotage Jordan and me." Elizabeth's blood boiled. "We'll let the evidence speak. There are even time-stamped emails from Jordan's corporate account sent to your personal email, Ms. Monroe, discussing upcoming expansions and product launches. Then trades were executed in your name or trusts linked to you within hours." A hush followed. Jordan's hands shook slightly. He seemed torn between denial and guilt. After all, the evidence was damning. If he denied it outright, he'd appear foolish. But if he admitted his involvement, he risked criminal charges and the wrath of the board. Hartridge leaned forward, his voice firm. "Jordan, I need answers." "Were you aware of these trades?" Jordan stared at the table, words refusing to form. Finally, he managed, Ava said it was all above board, that it was just normal investing. Ava let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow. "If you want to scapegoat me, Jordan, think carefully," she warned. "We made certain deals in your name as well. Your signatures are on plenty of documents." The entire boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Hartridge addressed one of his legal advisors. "Have we sent this to the SEC?" "Not yet," the advisor responded. "We wanted to confront them first." Jordan shot to his feet, panic etched on his face. "No need to escalate it. We can handle this internally. If I undo the trades, repay any gains, repay tens of millions of dollars," Hartridge asked. "And that would just be the tip of the iceberg if the SEC digs deeper. This is out of our hands if they launch a formal investigation." Elizabeth watched Jordan unravel. This was the man who had once been so composed, so unstoppable. Now he was cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. Ava, too, looked like a wild animal backed into a corner, eyes darting around the room. At that moment, a building security guard appeared at the door, knocking softly. "Mr. Hartridge, you asked for security on standby," he announced quietly. "Thank you," Hartridge replied, his tone like steel. "I believe we might need you." Ava's eyes flitted towards the door, then back to Hartridge. She adopted a pleading tone. "David, you know me. I've handled legal matters for some of the biggest players in the industry. I would never do anything to jeopardize your trust." Hartridge's face remained stony. "I trusted Jordan, not you. And this evidence suggests you're at the center of a major ethical breach. If you don't have a verifiable explanation for each of these trades and how you obtained insider information, I have no choice but to protect the company from liability." Suddenly, Jordan snapped. Fear twisted into anger, and he pointed a trembling finger at Elizabeth. You did this. You ruined everything because you couldn't handle that I moved on." Elizabeth steadied her breathing, preparing to reply. But Hartridge cut in calm yet firm. "Don't blame her for your poor decisions. You let your personal affair become a corporate liability." Something in Jordan cracked. He lunged toward Elizabeth as if to grab her documents or her phone, an irrational move likely spurred by desperation. But he never made contact. In a blink, the security guard stepped forward and intercepted Jordan, gripping his arms. "Stand down, sir," the guard said, voice authoritative. Jordan struggled, but the guard was a solid wall of muscle. Ava shrieked. "Let him go." "This is a private matter." Hartridge shook his head, anger coloring his features. "You just attempted to assault someone in my boardroom. Security remove Mr. Alberts from the premises." Jordan's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't do that. I'm on the board." "Not anymore," Hartridge said grimly. "I can and I will. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. Once that concludes, we'll determine your status. Now go and take Ms. Monroe with you." A second guard stepped in, guiding Ava toward the door as she protested threatening lawsuits and defamation claims. But her words rang hollow, overshadowed by the looming specter of an SEC investigation. Elizabeth stood off to the side, stunned by how quickly it had escalated from a tension-filled meeting to an outright meltdown. As Jordan and Ava were led out, Jordan craned his neck to shout at her, "You'll pay for this, Elizabeth. Don't think you've won." But the threat carried little weight now. In that moment, Elizabeth felt the mixture of triumph and sorrow that comes with toppling a man she once loved. She hadn't wanted to see Jordan destroyed, only to protect herself and the life they had built together. But Jordan's actions and Ava's ambition had forced her hand. Hartridge dismissed the board members, soon after instructing his legal team to cooperate fully with any investigations. He turned to Elizabeth with a sympathetic frown. "I'm sorry you had to endure this, Ms. Alberts. I assure you we'll handle it lawfully. Whatever personal or marital disputes remain, I hope you find closure." Elizabeth gave him a small nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your fairness." She gathered her documents and left the skyscraper, the bright Texas sun, striking her face as she stepped onto the street. The entire drama replayed in her mind. He let his mistress cut off my cards, but the CEO called security on him. She thought a bitter yet satisfying sense of irony spreading in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Legal battles would continue, depositions would be taken, and the divorce was far from final. But in this pivotal moment, she had taken back her power, standing against the storm that Jordan and Ava had unleashed. And for the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope that she might in the end be free from their tyranny. In the weeks that followed, word spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up on rumors of insider trading linked to a high-profile tech investor, hinting that a major name was under investigation. It didn't take long for the rumor mill to connect the dots to Jordan Alberts and his mysterious attorney-turned-partner, Ava Monroe. Elizabeth watched from the sidelines, inundated with calls and messages from acquaintances, reporters, and sometimes even old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored most of them, preferring to let the legal process unfold without adding fuel to the media frenzy. Jordan, under immense legal and financial pressure, attempted to strike a deal if Elizabeth agreed to keep quiet and not testify against him or Ava. Regarding insider trading, he would give her a generous divorce settlement. The settlement included alimony, a hefty lump sum, and properties that would secure her financial future. However, Elizabeth refused any agreement that required her to lie or withhold the truth if subpoenaed. Nonetheless, she allowed her lawyer Michelle to work out a fair settlement that didn't involve perjury. Eventually, Jordan capitulated, realizing he had to salvage what he could from the marriage and business meltdown. The final settlement granted Elizabeth a significant portion of the assets, the mansion by Lake Travis, ironically, and a sizable share of Jordan's original tech startup. Meanwhile, Ava disappeared from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. Rumors surfaced that she'd fled the country perhaps to avoid legal repercussions, while others suggested she was hiding out in some luxury villa, waiting for the storm to pass. Either way, her days of meddling in Jordan's finances seemed to be over. Elizabeth didn't celebrate Jordan's downfall. She quietly grieved the end of a marriage that had started in love and partnership, yet she also felt relief and a renewed sense of self. She returned to the Lake Travis mansion, deciding whether to keep it or sell. The sweeping views of the water brought back memories, some of which felt like knives to her heart, others that warmed her soul. She began a new chapter in her life, leveraging her PR skills to start a consultancy focused on helping women entrepreneurs navigate both business and personal challenges. She named it Phoenix Rose Consulting, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. To her surprise, she found more joy in championing other women than she ever did, standing behind Jordan at glitzy galas. She kept in touch with Patricia from Tesla, who occasionally updated her on the ongoing investigations. Whether Jordan faced criminal charges depended on further evidence. But at least for Elizabeth, the immediate threat to her assets and well-being had lifted. David Hartridge reached out, once inviting Elizabeth to a dinner with the board, presumably to mend fences. Elizabeth politely declined. She had no desire to relive the tension of board meetings or navigate corporate politics, where her personal life became public fodder. She was grateful for Hartridge's stance, but preferred to build her future away from the chaos. In moments of solitude, Elizabeth reflected on the entire ordeal. She'd once believed that love, loyalty, and shared ambition could conquer anything. Yet she also realized that unchecked power and ego could corrode even the strongest of bonds. Jordan's betrayal had been a painful lesson, but it set her free to discover her own strengths and a life not tethered to someone else's rising star. Yes, heartbreak lingered, and healing was an ongoing process. But Elizabeth found herself waking each day with a sense of purpose. She'd gather with female founders at local co-working spaces, host workshops on media relations, and offer moral support to those feeling overshadowed by bigger players. Each time she saw a spark of confidence ignite in another woman's eyes, she felt her own sense of wholeness return. In time, Elizabeth would finalize the divorce, sign the deeds, and officially start over. A sense of calm settled within her, like the slow, tranquil waves on Lake Travis at dawn. Her story, the humiliating card cancellations, the public meltdown, the mistress's meddling, would become a cautionary tale, one she shared sparingly, only when it might help others. Despite the scars, Elizabeth refused to let bitterness define her. She chose growth empathy, and a belief that with the right support, anyone can rise from the ashes more formidable than before. Just as Elizabeth thought she had reached stable ground, fate tossed her another curveball. A month after the settlement, Michelle called her urgently. "The feds want to depose you," she said. They uncovered new evidence Jordan may be involved in deeper crimes, bribery, money laundering. Ava might have orchestrated a network. Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Jordan never mentioned anything like that. They've found offshore transactions and documents with his signature, Michelle said grimly. 2 days later, Elizabeth sat in a stark federal office, flanked by Michelle and 2 serious agents. They questioned her about Jordan's finances, Ava's role, the card cancellations, and philanthropic events that may have masked backdoor deals. Elizabeth stuck to the facts. She neither speculated nor dramatized. One agent, impressed, said, "You've been very helpful, Ms. Alberts. This case is significant." She left emotionally drained but relieved. She hadn't been dragged down with Jordan, but the storm wasn't over. Whispers followed Jordan was hiding at a secluded ranch, dodging the press. Ava had vanished. More subpoenas were issued. An indictment loomed. Elizabeth stayed focused on her consultancy, channeling stress into helping other women navigate business pitfalls. Her story, once painful, became a symbol of warning and strength. Then came the headlines: Jordan Alberts indicted for insider trading, fraud, and obstruction. Ava was named but still missing. The scandal rocked the tech world. Elizabeth issued a single statement. "I'm saddened by Jordan's choices. I've cooperated fully with authorities and continue to rebuild my life." Eventually, Jordan pled guilty to a lesser charge, offering a tearful courtroom apology. Elizabeth watched from home, tears in her eyes, not from triumph, but quiet grief for the man she once loved. Still, she understood consequences had to follow actions. That night, beneath the soft moonlight over Lake Travis, Elizabeth allowed herself one last cry for the past that died and the hope still waiting ahead. Life has a way of testing our fortitude when we least expect it. Elizabeth Alberts began this journey as a devoted wife, only to see her world upended by betrayal and financial sabotage. Yet what she lost in illusions, she gained in unbreakable resilience. Standing up to powerful forces and calling out wrongdoing isn't easy, but it's sometimes the only way to protect your dignity and your future. If you found this story gripping, insightful, or inspiring, we invite you to be a part of our community. Like this video, share it with friends who need a reminder that courage can emerge from chaos, and subscribe for more real-life drama and empowering tales. Let Elizabeth's story serve as a beacon, no matter how ruthless the betrayal. There's always a path to reclaim your power and build a brighter tomorrow. You too can rise like a phoenix.